Welcome to Focus 54. My name is Jeffrey Murembechi, and every single week we sit down and talk about the real African news and issues to do with all 54 countries, the region, and the rest of the world, as is happens. And this time we are signing deals worth more than 500 million euros as an economic summit in Riyadh, and the first of its kind, a 3-day event which took place this November to boost political and investment ties. And I am talking about the Saudi Arabia African Summit. This had never been done before, and we're going to be asking why this is happening. Do we have opportunities? What are the threats? And how can we keep this going and make this better as a continent? And in today's episode, we will be joined by economic analyst and a very revered business investment analyst, Tino Kambasha, who will break it down and make it much simpler for you and I. I know you usually will deal with the numbers and all those economic equations, but today he will help us out with simplifying it for just you and me to see the opportunities that we can find from this summit. And we can't start off the show without giving you all the news that's happening across the continent. And we step out in Ghana, one of the countries that has also started the visa-free policy for all Africans. I hope that more nations will start doing that. Now, Ghana's President Nana Akufo-Addo called for a united front for African leaders on demands of reparations of transatlantic slavery and colonial era damages by some Western leaders have recently moved to acknowledge the wrongs of the colonial era in Africa and museums at large with so many stolen artifacts and treasures. And we are not spared as Zimbabwe. Many maps and many historical artifacts, and one of the biggest atrocities is having some of our ancestral remains, the bodies of people that are relatives that are now found in their private collections. We move to East Africa, another country, Rwanda, that made a bold statement having visa-free agreements with all African nations. And Rwanda said that it took the issue with the British Supreme Court striking down London's plan to send the migrants to the East African country on a basis that it was not safe a destination for asylum seekers. A 5-judge panel rejected the controversial policy, upholding a lower court judgment that sending undocumented migrants to Rwanda was unlawful and put the rights of asylum seekers afforded to international law at real risk. So that's a very complicated issue, which is opening up a can of many worms, and there will be a spotlight on that. Now we move to Somalia, where the UN has warned a quarter of Somalia's population, that is 4.3 million people, is at risk of going hungry at the end of the year. And as impoverished country is at the Horn of Africa, is facing a deadly floods. I know when such a disaster happens in Europe, when it happens in the Americas, we come together as African countries. So this is a clarion call from Focus 54 to say, if you're going to have those hashtags, if you're going to start NGOs that will be donating, it's time that all the rest of the 53 countries step up. Imagine if $1 or even 50 cents from each resident or any inhabitant of Africa goes towards that, we could save 4.3 million people. These are official statistics from the United Nations, meaning that the whole world is watching. And the World Food Programme said the floods have severely affected communities already that is struggling to recover from the worst drought in decades, which brought millions to the brink of starvation. So the issues we've always talked about, climate change and the devastating effects, are real, and they're happening in real time. Finally, we end off in East Africa once again, in Kenya, where the Kenyan government has declared Monday a public holiday to encourage residents to plant 100 million trees across the country, a call which hundreds of people in Nairobi responded. And President William Ruto has pledged that 15 billion trees will be planted by 2032 to boost Kenya's forest cover, and following the Horn of Africa's regional drought of over 40 years. So this is one of those beautiful things that are happening. And if you chop down one tree, plant 2 more. This is the end of the first segment and what's happening in Africa. Stay tuned for Focus 54. The second segment, we talk about the Saudi Arabia Africa Summit. And welcome back to the second segment of Focus 54. We are talking about the Saudi Arabia summit that was held in Egypt with various countries and various stakeholders. I must say that the who is who of the two continents was there, and it's not up to me to find out exactly what we're talking about. I am joined by a revered economist, analyst, and one person who understands investment not only at a local but at an international scale, Mr. Tino Kambash. Good to have you in studio.
Hi, Jeff. Hi, viewers. Thanks for having me.
Finally, it's good to actually sit down with you on a more formal platform than our usual weekend banters on sports fields discussing the economy. Now, look, in short, this summit, I know our president was there, various sheikhs were there, and many business people were there. Is this something brand new, or the relationship between African countries and the Middle East and Saudi Arabia has always been there?
I think the relationship has always been there, but not at the scale that we're seeing now. So this summit was the first of its kind, and it had most of the African heads of states that were there. Also, a lot of discussions were had on the practicality of trade between the two countries. And I think this comes at a good time as we're having a free Africa trade area that we're working on as Africa by itself, and looking at Africa as one market. Into the bigger world.
So when you mentioned that it's important that the heads of states are there, does this also mean that the discussions that are done there are also going to turn into policy, or are likely or intended to turn into policy in various countries?
We've already seen the setting up of quite a lot of committees. So we've already segmented. So for example, our Minister of Agriculture was there. Our Minister of Finance was also there, and also Minister of Industry and Commerce, amongst other government delegates. That already catapults a whole different setup going down that's going to filter down into the whole of government. Having the president there is a huge thing, because that sets the tone, and the agreements are then signed at that level. It's kind of having the leader telling the delegation, this is what we want, and you're here to hear for yourself. So I think it's going to actually move along quite quickly, and having the president there is definitely a bonus.
Sounds like a very direct channel. You don't have to then send someone to talk about what you guys discussed. The president did talk about, President Emerson Mnangagwa did talk about, Saudi Arabia being interested in grain, and prior to this, there was an agreement between the Cairo government, or the Egyptian government, and Zimbabwe to share technology in terms of drug manufacturing, and if a drug is, let's say a painkiller, is manufactured in Egypt, if it's authorized there, it's now authorized in Zimbabwe. We share the same standard. Now let's turn this to an agrarian economy. How does this shape up? Obviously, Saudi Arabia cannot compare itself to Africa in terms of agricultural produce.
I think it's a win-win, actually. It's a two-way street. So from Saudi Arabia, we can also benefit from innovation. The Crown Prince has done amazing things there. So if we're now linking directly into our government and how we do, whether it's infrastructure or agriculture, and use their technology, it then improves our yields. It also improves our innovation locally and our technology. So I think it's a kind of a match made in heaven, and I think it's going to be quite positive going forward. We're also looking at Africa looking at itself as one market going forward. And I think that's going to attract quite a lot of different markets. So yes, we've had the Saudi Arabia market, but I think we're going to see quite a lot maybe also from the Asian countries, because if you look at Africa alone and its population versus its GDP, it's not matching up. You're getting a GDP that's almost the size of the UK, but population of much bigger, billions of people. So I think we're going to see a lot of markets wanting to work with Africa going forward.
Now, obviously, like you said, Saudi Arabia more advanced in terms of as an economy and the way they operate. Let's just look at things such as flights. It's no big secret the two big airlines there. You've got Qatar and you've got Emirates. They're actually called Fly Emirates, and it seems like it's cheaper to fly from Harare to Dubai, or from Cape Town to Dubai, than it is from Cape Town to Ghana.
Exactly.
What are the key infrastructural and operational adjustments that need to be made by African countries to make that free trade between us and then the trade between us and the Saudis even better?
I think it's also looking at airlines need to also adjust. We've had hotels adjust for Airbnb. We've had taxi services adjust with Uber. So airlines need to really look at reshaping what the essence is. It's about connectivity, not necessarily distance and flights and so forth. So I'll give you an example. For ourselves, Victoria Falls should be the regional hub. There's no reason why someone should fly over and land in OR Tambo and then go to Zambia. That makes no sense at all. Looking at our strategic location, our distance to other countries within SADC, so it's about the destination rather than the flight itself. So the flights that get that, the airlines that understand that, and then you change that into a tourism destination like Dubai, where if you really look at Dubai to say,
Dubai,
what
30 years ago, there was nothing. It was just sand, right?
Just sand. And look at it now. Through innovation and flights. Flights are very important. So you create a destination. Now it's almost a thing that, I'm going to Dubai, in the next couple of months. Almost every other person you hear has either been there or knows someone who's been to Dubai. So we need to also have a look at that as Africa, especially as SADC, to have destination flights and destination holidays where I'll obviously say Vic Falls because it's our home country. But if you could have us being the Dubai of the region, then you will find the flights will start coming in by themselves. Yeah.
Now, the politics and the money are very difficult to always separate. I mean, historically, since the 1960s, we've always had, as a continent, a good relationship, trade relationship with Saudi Arabia, and not really any motivations politically and with the money and economically. Both our interests aligned in terms of where we want to go as two different regions.
I think, when you look at the bigger thing, politics and economics, a lot has changed in the world. The geopolitics has changed in the world. We have realized as Africa that we're taking out, whether it's raw materials or unprocessed manufacturing tools, and we are selling them into the world and then rebuying them again. Whereas maybe what we need to do is to have an end-to-end agreement with countries that are actually going to be reusing our equipment or our grains. So instead of us having our grains being hoarded by one nation or one or two nations, we can actually strategically deal directly with countries like Saudi Arabia. We can even look at outgrower schemes where we teach people how to grow the grains to their spec. We can look at issues like goat. Goat consumption is high.
It is high.
It's huge.
I think, obviously the Saudi community is predominantly Islam. So does that also mean that farmers will also have to, just adjust their farming practices or processes in line with Islamic practice? Yeah.
So what we need to do is to understand what is wanted by the end user, and then work our way backwards and have them come through, maybe train us and teach us the ways that they want us to prepare that. Halal meat, we can open abattoirs as a country, state-owned. Well, I guess CSC can also be part of that. And if you look at Matabeleland alone, I mean the goat rearing in that area is massive, but we don't have a centralized system to bring that and create a market. So we should have Gogo in one village, whether it's in Lupani, and Gogo in Mat North or something, can both sell that same product to the same market for a better price. But they now need to be taught on the ways and means of doing that, and what to feed, and so forth. Because obviously markets are very specific on what they then consume, so they want to make sure stuff is organic and also the right abattoirs are used.
Oh, thank you. So now, if you're just joining us, you are watching Focus 54, and we are discussing the issue of the Saudi African Summit, which was recently held in Egypt. And joining me as economist and a business analyst, Tino Kambasha. And we've been talking about the benefits and the opportunities that are surrounding this summit. But in the next segment that's coming up, we will talk about what needs to be done to maintain sustainability, what are the possible threats, with bilateral relationships with the continent, and where are we lacking as a continent for us to get to the end zone? My name is Jeffrey Murimbechi. Stay tuned. The third segment is coming up right after this. Welcome back to the third and final segment of Focus 54. We are discussing the Saudi Arabia Africa Summit that was held in Cairo. We talked about the upside. You know, you can imagine goat farmers in Lupani. You can imagine, horticulture farmers in the Eastern Highlands sending their produce directly to Saudi Arabia. And to discuss this and how this is possible and many other ideas is our economist who's joining us today, Tino Kambasha. Tino, now we've talked about the bright side. We can also talk about minerals. We can talk about intellectual property exchange and all of those things. But what are the risks involved? As an economist, you know that there is no such thing as a free lunch. There is no such thing as equilibrium. One benefits more than the other. Where are the risks and how are we exposing ourselves when we're opening ourselves more to the Saudis?
I think the risks come along when we sign these agreements. We need to make sure that these agreements are fair on both sides, and which is something that His Excellency has mentioned on multiple occasions, that we need to get into fair deals. Unfortunately, prior to this, especially in the mining sector, we had quite a lot of just ore being exported, and a lot of other minerals which we didn't even know were in those ores were then taken out, whether it's through a smelting company in South Africa or abroad. So I think the risks come with that. And the number one, we need value addition. Number two, we need skills transfer to our people. And number three, we need, as you mentioned, an exchange of intellectual property. If we can get that and also get value for money for our produce, I think we can mitigate some of these risks. But also, the one thing that we have, the biggest risk, I think, right now, is the fact that the region, I'll speak about SADC, is that we are working to a free trade area, but we're using different currencies, we're using different interest rates, we've got different transport facilities, we're entering different jurisdictions, we've got many tax revenue authorities. So if you're looking at a good going from Durban all the way to DRC.
So SARS and ZIMRA have different policies.
Exactly.
The duty that's calculated, in transit is totally different.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned the issue of skills transfer. One of the key things that I've seen from the Saudi government and actually working with the embassy of the UAE in Harare is that they're very big on sustainable development goals. How big was this on the agenda when they were meeting with African presidents in terms of all the 16 sustainable development goals?
That came up quite a lot. SDGs are priority globally, not just whether it's regionally or in the Arab world. So it was actually quite one of the key points that was discussed at the summit. And most of the presidents that I heard speak had committed to improving and coming up with sustainable SDGs.
Okay, so which of these SDGs would you say is closer? I know poverty alleviation is one of the key things, and just coming from a background of a sports fan, you always ask yourself, what if Denver Mkamba got a contract to play in the Arab Pro League? Those kind of things. Yep. Do you think it will get that deep into the Saudi big pockets in sport and the billions that they have, could look at Africa and say, hey, half of the English Premier League is African, so why don't we just get them?
100%. So again, going back to my outgrower, I like the outgrower model. Mm-hmm. So if we then shift that to sport, let's say, and we get the academies, the big billion-dollar academies, to come and adopt maybe a small little academy for kids.
But the Saudis don't do anything small. Everything is grand.
for us. Yeah, I know what you mean. But if we can start having them support children, like really sports academies, let's say from 10-year-olds, and breeding into their clubs, just like the same thing that Liverpool does and Arsenal, any of these big clubs do, and have a two-way system with them and a training regime that makes sense. We can actually, I don't want to say breed, but create, like super sportsmen as well. So it's not just about food and minerals and intellectual property. It's also, sporting cultural. I mean, if we were to exchange cultures, what we do in our culture, whether it's the Shona, Ndebele, or Tonga culture, and to start also understanding the Arabic culture, understand, this is where this came from. And with migration, the first real area that civilization moved to from Africa was actually Saudi Arabia. Did you know that? Across the Red Sea, yeah. Yes. So we share quite a lot. And even if you look at the trade zones that were used back in the days, all the way down through Ethiopia, Kenya, you'll find that there's all the way down to Munamatapa, actually, where we got spices from the Arab world and from the Asians. So there's a lot of historical and cultural similarities which we could also exchange with them.
Now, let's talk about the big elephant in the room, which we've always talked about on Focus 54, the issue of security within the region. We've got quite within Africa. Well, look, if we talk about SADC, we're pretty much the golden standard of peace. East Africa, some parts, but we're now talking about Central Africa and the Sahel region. We've always had conflicts, uprisings. The DRC, for example, has 130 conflict groups that are within that nation. How big of a deterrent is this when you want to start growing economies and upscaling the continental GDP?
It is a risk. And it's funny you should mention that, because His Excellency actually specifically mentioned security and peace. And it's something of a concern, and we're seeing mushrooming up. But I think the good thing is that it was raised, and it's something that the not only just the region, but the continent itself is looking at to see how can we bring about, whether it's through united unions to bring about peace, but also dialogue is quite important. So I think going forward, we are going to see more efforts into the peace and security side of things, as all leaders articulated.
Now, just lastly, just looking at Africa, I've seen that the scramble for Africa is on once again. This time it's the scramble for resources. We've got BRICS, we've got the G20 summit, putting like an olive branch for Africa. We also have Russian countries, Russia and its supporting nations, China, various stakeholders. The European Union as well is also trying to have more bilateral relations. America, the United Kingdom, everyone wants a piece of Africa. Why should we trust the Saudi Arabian countries and countries from that region over everybody else?
I think we're not saying we should be specific to which friends we play with, as we're friends to all and enemies to none. But the key thing is, what type of agreements are we getting into individually with all these different nations? They just must be win-win. Gone are the days. Africa's woken up that this issue of divide and conquer and minerals are being moved out of the continent and with no value addition. I think those days are over. And you're hearing a consensus amongst African leaders that are now saying value addition is the key thing. We need our people, we need that process to happen here. We need those machines to be working here. We need our people to learn how to do that skill, or to cut that diamond, or to manufacture that piece of clothing. So we're seeing a lot of that happening now. So I think going forward, it's about a deal-by-deal basis that we make sure that we protect ourselves as Zimbabwe, as SADC, and as Africa on a larger scale.
Thank you very much. You brought some different insight, and I think as an African, if you're watching this, you know that we are on the right track. It's all about due diligence and making sure that everything is up to par. And we'll be talking about this and more of these issues that are happening in Africa as we get closer to the end of the year. What will Africa do in the next 10 years? And is Vision 2030, Zimbabwe's Vision 2030, aligned with the African perspective and the global perspective in various sectors of the economy? security, and other issues. My name is Jeffrey Murimbechi, and thank you so much for watching Focus 54. You can always watch recaps of this episode and many others on our Facebook page, that's ZBC News Online. For now, it's a goodbye.